Real Talkers, good morning. It's 8:30. Wow, Sam, we just snuck in, as a matter of fact. Sam and I we had kind of a relaxed vibe here going, listening to Ayla Brooke and the soundman coming through the studio speakers, and I looked down, and luckily we technically went on air at 8:30, but it is now 8:31 Mountain Time. Kind of a, I won't say lazy. It's not been a lazy morning, but we're easing in relaxed fashion, hitting the airwaves, so to speak, at 8:30 and 55 seconds Mountain Time. Thanks for joining us. It's already 10:30 for our friends tuning in the Eastern time zones in the middle of the afternoon. For some of our viewers, some of our audience members that are watching from Europe, for example, which is where our first guest is chiming in from, Tom Rackman, in just a moment. From London, it's going to be a great show today. We promised you an agricultural roundtable in the first 3 months of the show. We promised that we would get to those issues, because the whole point of the show, it's not the type of show, or if you're listening to this later in the day, thank you. This is not the type of podcast where we're simply knee-jerk reacting to news headlines all the time. Oh, they're talking about the newsmakers with something shiny, waving it, and we sort of and run over to the shiny thing all the time. No, sometimes we'll taping an eye on. And while it, may be in your part of the world frickin' freezing, Mr. Bigglesworth, right now, it's absolutely freezing, and the ground is far from thawed, and crop inputs are not something that the average civilian or city slicker is thinking about right now. It doesn't mean there's not a ton going on behind the scenes. So we're going to hit ag from a few different perspectives. I'm really looking forward to it. Brittany Hennig is a crop researcher. She's a crop scientist, basically. She's going to take us into the work that she's doing over the microscope, so to speak. Sean Haney is the founder of Real Agriculture. He's a host on Sirius XM. He's got a Real Agriculture show there on Rural Radio 147. You probably listen to it if you're tuning in on Sirius from time to time in the rural areas and wanting to stay in the know. You know who Sean Haney is. And then my good pal Jeff None from Lakeside Farmstead. He and his wife Coralie and their entire family, they do the sort of the traditional stuff you'd expect. Kids are involved in 4-H and this, that, and the other, but they're also doing a ton of stuff. I mean, we'll get Jeff to talk about how they're using drywall offcuts to create fertilizer, and how their family overcame tragedy, a massive barn fire a while ago, but they're rebuilding the operation in a totally different direction. The innovation is mind-blowing. They've just opened a cheesery. So, I mean, they're just doing amazing things. They've got Wagyu Holstein beef. I mean, people are just, the Lakeside name is establishing itself based on some of the things that Jeff learned making cheese in Quebec. He's now bringing it here to Western Canada. It's a great story. So as you can tell, we've got a million angles that we'll hit ag from. That's starting at 9 o'clock today. And we're very much looking forward to it. Plus, based on our conversation yesterday with Cameron Hughes, the king of cheer, we have a jersey auction that's going on right now. This is kind of, I guess, technically it's our show's second charitable endeavor. Because as you know tonight, Sam, are you able to, on short notice, grab me that slide for Greta Bar, that one that I sent you a couple of days ago? You know which one I'm talking about. It's Healthcare Worker Appreciation Day today. Thanks, Sam. Didn't even give the guy the heads up, and he had that up there in like 10 seconds. Unbelievable, this guy. It's Healthcare Worker Appreciation Day starting today, tomorrow, and Saturday at Greta Bar, and Real Talk is very proud to be presenting this alongside our friends at Yvonne's Furniture and, of course, Greta Bar here. If you're a healthcare worker, starting at 4 o'clock today when Greta opens, you can give them a call, place your order, and if you can prove you're a healthcare worker when you pick it up, it's curbside pickup only. So, show them your hospital pass or whatever you have. You're going to get a free meal, so up to $25. So basically a $25 credit on your meal. So that's, I guess, officially Real Talk's first charitable involvement, at least publicly. And our second one, I guess, was an impromptu one yesterday from Cameron Hughes. We talked to him, his book, The King of Cheer. What a dude, hey? Everybody that was watching, Brad wrote in. Brad's like riding his, what do you call it? Like, the mounted cycle. Brad's got his like awesome street touring bike, but it's got some cool setup in his garage where Brad will ride like 100K and watch Real Talk the entire time. This guy's phenomenal. And Brad says, he says, watching Cameron just fired me up for my ride yesterday. Cameron's sort of the professional crowd igniter. Well, he showed us an Oilers sweater that he had. He held it up kind of impromptu. This is part of our interview yesterday. You can watch the full interview. Of course, you just go to our YouTube channel. Hope that you'd subscribe if you're there. And of course, yesterday's show will be right there. And Cameron sort of thought, well, what do you think people might think about this? So he's going to sign it. I'm going to sign it as the official in-game host of the Oilers. He's going to throw in a signed copy of his book, King of Cheer. And because a couple of you asked for it, I'm going to throw in an old mug. He's throwing in an old mug. It's kind of a collector's item.
Not a used old mug.
Not a used
right?
old mug. A new old mug.
Well, there we go. Yeah.
Does that mean a new old mug? That works, right?
That works.
Everything old is new and new.
It's a discontinued mug, but it is unused.
It's discontinued. That's right.
Go.
And
that makes it sound like a collector's item.
Well, we'll say it. It is a collector's item for sure. It even comes still wrapped in its plastic. Ooh. So that goes to show you how
the one you gave me wasn't even wrapped in plastic. That one was probably used.
Oh yeah, that one had seen thousands of people. Oh, yeah. I hope you cleaned that mug.
It's been
Sam.
through the dishwasher a few times.
Yeah, with the hottest cycle, I hope. So we didn't really know how this. Cameron kind of sprung that on us yesterday, and we thought, okay, yeah, sure, we can do a charitable fundraiser. But a lot of real talkers were chiming in and saying, okay, hang on a second though, like how is this auction going to work and what's the deal? And we kind of went, we're going to figure it out on the fly. So here's the deal. So we've had some of you behind the scenes bidding on that sweater. We'll call it the charity package. Bidding on it behind the scenes, which we really appreciate. Cameron said we'll do it for a minimum of $300. Every single cent of that, obviously, is going to go to Momentum Counseling. They provide sort of a pay-as-you-can counseling, and for a lot of people, we know access to mental health services. We learned this in our roundtable yesterday. Is a lot easier said than done. Getting an appointment is one thing. Being able to pay for it is an entire other thing. So we know that that's a challenge. I'm happy to tell you behind the scenes that the sweater's at $400 right now. We're going to be keeping an eye on the Real Talk RJ hashtag. That's this show's official hashtag, presented by Park Power. And then, of course, we're also going to keep an eye on the live chat. So, Sam, maybe you can do me a favor because you don't have much going on. I mean, you just sort
Not
of
one bit. No.
Just another mail
day at the office.
Just another mail it in morning for Samuel Brooks, the technical producer of this show. Barely has anything on his plate this morning.
I didn't have my notebook out.
So maybe you can. Well, you get your notebook out to write down profound things that guests say, and I'm just running my mouth right now, so that you didn't need your notebook right now. But hey, let's talk about something on the fly. People are saying our video's choppy. Is our video choppy today? It looks perfectly fine.
It was when we first went on air. I restarted it. Our bitrate smoothed out. We're in good shape.
Hey guys, don't worry. Our bitrate smoothed out. I don't know what. That's why Sam's here. I have no idea. So the video's not choppy anymore. Okay, that's great. Genevieve says, I thought it was my crummy rural internet. Well, don't worry, Genevieve. We have like internet numbers we can flex, don't we? Aren't we like pretty proud of our internet? Or not so much. We're like middle of the road.
We have gigabit download and 150 megabit upload.
Is that pretty good?
Yeah, that is good.
If
internet.
that was a car, approximately which car would it be? Would that be like?
I'd say I'd put that at like a V6.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, we're not going all the way. This isn't your highest performance.
But is it a Mercedes-Benz AMG V6 that'll push 450 horses when you need them, or is it like a Mazda 626? I don't even know if they have V6s. Oh, you drive a Mazda. Let me pick a different car.
My Mazda is a tiny little four-cylinder.
It's a four-banger.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like middle of the road.
Yeah.
It's like a turbo V6 is not bad.
Turbo V6. Yeah.
Not bad. Not bad.
I had a 95 Camry with a V6, and that thing kicked.
Yeah.
That was fun to drive.
There are cars. There's all kinds of fascinating cars with real. I think Tom Rackman's probably ready to go, and he's
just watching car chat.
And Tom's in London, England, being like, I was under the impression this is a serious show, and here these idiots are talking about. I was about to start talking about the Ford Taurus SHO. You remember back in the day? Do you know the show?
Yeah.
The Taurus SHO, which was like the family. It was like the practical family car, but could also like walk you off the. Anyway, why don't we wait until after we talk about intellectual courage in the age of Twitter with Tom Rackman, a serious author out of London, England? Then, these two jabronis can get into comparing internet download and bit speed to cars in the mid-1990s. How's that? All of this to say, to bring this full circle, and you're going, where is he even bringing this back to? We're so off track. What is he even returning to? I'm reminding you, and please do keep an eye on the live chat. I'll keep an eye on the hashtag. Unless something's changed right now, that jersey auction's at $400. So we're going to wrap it up. We'll wrap it up at the end of the show today. I'd love to see a minimum $500 donation going to Millennium Counseling and Momentum Counseling, pardon me. And we're going to make that happen. And we're going to get you your autographed jersey and everything that goes along with it. Of course, Bitcoin Well makes sure that we have... I'm going to attribute Bitcoin Well sponsorship to our internet purchase because it brings it full circle. Digital,
There you go.
crypto, digital. It's kind of a nice. So Bitcoin Well, a big part of their sponsorship, brings us our internet connectivity every day. I mean, we pay the bills, right? And they want to do the exact same thing for you, which is keeping you in the loop, helping you understand everything to do with cryptocurrency. It's what they do best, based out of right here in Edmonton. But of course, Bitcoin ATMs for your buying and selling convenience all across Canada. They're getting set to go public. You can learn more about Bitcoin Well by checking out the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
So I'm reading Globe and Mail online the other day, and I come across this piece, a fascinating piece. Where is intellectual courage in the age of Twitter? And I went, yeah, that's something I think that I can get into. We're thrilled that the author of the piece has agreed to join us this morning. Born in London, raised in Vancouver, Tom Rockman set off for New York about 20 years ago. Entered journalism. He's worked at the Associated Press, the editor of International News. He's worked abroad as a correspondent in various cities, but he always wanted to write fiction. So he quit and he moved to Paris, publishing his first novel about 10 years ago, the international bestseller, The Imperfectionists. He's written 3 other acclaimed works of fiction. He was a juror for this past year's Giller Prize, and he's managing editor of Persuasion magazine. Tom, welcome to Real Talk, and thanks for making time for us this morning.
Thanks for having me on, Ryan.
I love your bio in this piece for the Globe. It says, Tom, author of The Imperfectionist, is the managing editor of Persuasion. He tweets uneasily at Tom Rockman, and I thought that nailed it. It kind of captures the spirit of what you're talking about. We'll get into the piece itself, but what put this, as an author, as a writer, what put this concept on your radar?
Well, I'd really avoided Twitter for a long time. I remember when I first heard about it, it was, I think, around 2007, not long after it began. And it seemed like the most unappealing possible idea I'd ever heard of, the idea of sending text messages out into the public. Text messages were private, I thought, just as I wouldn't necessarily want people listening in on my conversations on the telephone. It didn't even occur to me that this was a good idea. So I avoided it, and the years passed, and more people were on this app, and more people were using it, and it kept appearing in more and more articles. And after about a decade, I started to realize that my scorn of this new platform was actually leaving me somewhat out in the cold. But I also knew from those people who were using it that it had all sorts of terrible attributes, the kinds of things that we're constantly hearing about, that people are getting upset about, whether it's people writing things that they then regret getting fired for them, or whether it's online harassment, or whether it's just the polarization that seems to come from the furious arguments that go on endlessly on Twitter. It never seemed suited to me. But the thing that puzzled me about that was that I always wanted to be a writer. And yet there was this extraordinary writing app, and something about it really put me off. And then recently I took on a new position, working at this publication, Persuasion, and I started to think maybe this is an opportunity. Maybe this is a chance to test it out. And so I spent quite a while just lurking around and reading and not really summoning the courage to say anything. And finally, I thought I'd better say something. It was just after it became clear that Trump had lost the election, and I felt a great sense of relief at that, and a little bit of hope again about the future after a fairly bleak period. And so I tweeted something, and it wasn't anything of any importance, but I put my toe in the water, and I've been doing so ever since, and thinking hard about what Twitter is and what it means for the kind of cultural conversation that goes on regularly, and what it means in particular in terms of this article, what Twitter means for the idea of trying to be courageous and trying to speak honestly and in a forthright and truthful manner at a time of such bitter disputes and arguments.
You write, wonderful descriptive approach. Quote, even avid Twitter users dubbed the platform a hellscape with its dog piles and its dunks and its moral grandstanding. You say, in one respect, it's hopeful we fight over what amounts to good and evil online. Places where intellectual bravery are indisputable are places to avoid. All you'd need to test your courage in Pyongyang is one wrong sentence, those endless disputes on Twitter, also the din of free speech. So you've been dipping your toes in the water, so to speak, I guess for probably about a month now, or I guess November 20th was the election, so let's call it 2 months. What has your mind changed at all with regards to what you've seen? Is it the same platform or the same hellscape that you remember back in the day when you first had your experience?
I think it's not at all the same. I think that if we're talking about what it looked like early on, it's changed so immensely. I think it's the breadth of it, and the fact, above all, that everybody who is trying to say something in public is on it. So the idea of recusing oneself from that massive conversation is more and more difficult. And that I felt like I was sort of tugged in for that reason, because if I thought to myself, if I want to be trying to say things in public sometimes, as presumably I did if I was going to be a writer, then to just stand aside from the loudest and largest platform, the largest cultural conversation in history, seemed a little bit crazy. On the other hand, there's no question that it's in many respects a miserable and problematic place. I guess that my conclusion in some regards was that it might be imperfect. In fact, it might be pretty awful sometimes, but it's what we have. And I'm prone, I think, to complaining and lamenting about the way that technology has changed and destroyed many of the things of the analog world that I grew up with and that I love. But I'm also a realist, and I see that these are the circumstances, and so I had to figure out how to engage with it. I think that perhaps my views are in some ways they're a little bit fresher because I haven't been engaged in it. On the other hand, they're probably a little bit naive because I have yet to be brutalized online. And I hope that your kind listeners aren't going to be the first to do that.
well, so far, I mean, Tom, I've been keeping an eye on the hashtag, and everybody's behaving themselves right now. Though you've not yet said anything inflammatory. You don't. I took a quick spin through your timeline. Just you and I have never met personally, and I thought, well, I don't. When it comes down to the question of what's this guy afraid of. I wanted to know, are you out there, putting out alternative therapies to, are you suggesting that, cancer fundraising is one big ruse, or are you suggesting that people that adhere to religion are fools? I mean, are you putting something out there that's so inflammatory, that's so offensive that you'd be inviting on the dog pile? But that's not really the case. So let me ask you, what were you afraid of?
Well, I think that, first of all, I think that it's very possible to say fairly measured, reasonable things and still suffer an attack, partly because of the fact that people differ on what reasonable is nowadays. And also because it's not like the conversations going on Twitter are between people who are entirely reasonable. It has, in some respects, it offers that same release for some people that kind of road rage does, that you can gun the speaking of cars, as you were before, you can gun past the person who's annoying you and scream out the window in a way that you'd never do if you were actually seeing them. And I think that kind of release is what the relative anonymity of Twitter allows. So if people feel strongly about an issue, you might be saying nothing that is particularly inflammatory, but you nonetheless might get a terrible blindside from somebody who feels intensely in a different way or feels that you have somehow crossed some line. So that's part of it. I think that the other element of all of this is that we're really talking about a culture nowadays that isn't a single culture anymore, right? So in the past, there were all sorts of subcultures, of course, but there was some sort of establishment way of viewing things, and that the idea of moral courage, intellectual courage, was that you had somebody, an outsider in some way, who looked at the way that things were going, and they said, this is an outrage, and I feel it's wrong, and I'm going to say something honest about it. and hopefully people will listen. And if they went against the powers that be, they often did so at great cost. And this continues to be the case in countries that are extremely repressive to this day. But the way that the cultural conversation works on the internet is that there isn't clearly a kind of establishment view anymore. You have tons of different subcultures that are each intense and fierce and each battling and desperately trying to put their views forward. And as a result of that, it's kind of hard to know what being honest and courageous in your views really amounts to anymore. You can also frequently say things that seem to be fairly pedestrian, and you might get a dog pile. But on the other hand, there's another danger on Twitter, which is that if you say something that is extreme, you're very likely to get a lot of supporters, because people always worry about the online harassment and being insulted and attacked. But that's also quite obviously the way to get followers, is if you say extreme things.
Yeah.
I suppose one of the things that just to answer your question about what scared me was that I don't know if it was entirely fear about the dog piles. It was also the sense that if I ended up finding myself having to sort of perform for followers, then would I be me anymore? Would I be saying what I thought, or would I get sucked into this weird conversation with faceless group of people who I didn't know, but I was trying in some way to quench?
This is interesting. Heim's watching says, why would you care what somebody says online? Just ignore them. I've been in the shallow end of the dog pile pool, and I've experienced it to a certain degree. In one case where let me say a comment that I made was, it's a long story, and Tom, I won't bore you with it, but it was made without a full understanding of an issue on my part, made with good intention. The interpretation of it made the comment appear to be abhorrent, and I was crucified for about 48 hours, and I've witnessed that type of phenomenon, and it required some damage control, and the whole matter is behind us now. But I can say, for someone to say, well, you don't care what somebody says online, just ignore them, that's not an adequate response in some of these circumstances. You're talking about people whose, I can't remember the gal's name online off the top of my head, but she's the classic study. I'm trying to remember the story. She was like a foreign aid worker or something like that, and she made a joke on her private social media about something to do with AIDS or something. I think she said, I'm going to Africa, hopefully I don't get AIDS or something like that. She had like minimum amount of followers. By the time her plane landed and she got back into Wi-Fi and turned her phone on, her future was done. Although I guess I'm proving the fact I can't remember her name. Maybe her future's not done, but if you Google her now, you'd find it out. I mean, your entire life can change if you say something inflammatory, if you invite that mob in.
Absolutely. I think that's completely true. And I think that it's easy to say, oh, who cares about just an opinion like that? And if it's one or two, that's probably true. But there's also the risk that you can have a mob of people who turn against you. And the case that you're talking about that woman, she intended that as a joke that was to make fun of racism. So it wasn't intended as a racist remark, but unfortunately appearing as it did online, that people interpreted it as a racist remark, and there was suddenly a call to get her fired. And by the time she landed from that flight, she had been fired. So there are cases like that mean that you have to take it seriously. But there's another element of it too, which is that if you get a lot of these things, and if they are personal and brutal and maybe threatening, it's very hard to know quite how to interpret that. It's certainly at the very least unsettling, and it's definitely going to affect how you feel and how you think and how you express yourself online. And it's obvious too that it drives people towards polarization, because if you have one group of people who say, oh, you're so great for having said that thing, and another group that says you're the worst person who ever existed for saying that thing, then you're going to gravitate towards the ones who are kind to you. So I think that it's you can't quite write it off as easily as that. Another problem with it is that if it ends up being that you can only manage in this environment if you are able to take any amount of brutality and assaults on your character and public insults that might dog you online forever. If you're the kind of person who just doesn't care about that, then you're a certain personality type. You're resilient, and it's impressive. But do we necessarily want all of the voices who are speaking, who are loud and prominent, to be defined by the fact that they can just take a lot of attacks. I mean, that doesn't seem to me like it's necessarily going to bring forth the wisest and the most interesting and valid points of view if it's just a question of having thick armor.
Yeah, it was Justine Sacco, by the way. It was December 20th of 2013. Hard to believe, 8 years ago already. She tweeted before the final leg of her trip to Cape Town, South Africa, "Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding, I'm white." And obviously, when she landed, her entire life was blown up because of that. I'm curious, Tom. I don't want to. I mean, we've got about 5 minutes. We asked you for a certain block of time. I know that your time is in high demand. I don't want to keep you here too long, but I've got a few questions left for you. One of them, I'm just curious about you. You lamented the loss of certain analog elements of your life, and I'm just curious. I think we might get some insight with regards to what those are. What do you miss most about the analog life?
Well, great many things. I mean, I think that I miss the inability to just be offline, to be unconnected, and to be allowed to have one's thoughts just percolate away without the constant ping and back and forth of the internet. We're all, I mean, I don't know about all of us, but most of us, certainly I am, addicted to this. It operates very, very brilliantly on some fundamental structures of our brain, and it addicts us just like any other addiction. And as a result, it's hard to really tear yourself away from it. And the effect of this is that I, like a lot of people, have a kind of nostalgia for a world that is in some ways still there. I mean, you could just go to the countryside and turn off your phone, but we're connected, and in some, especially during COVID, we're more reliant than ever on these communications and these forms of connection. So I think the possibility of just being alone and unconnected is something that I miss. I also miss many of the elements of thinking and the arts, and particularly literature and writing, given that that's the field I work in, that have been overshadowed a bit or aren't really managing quite as well in this online environment. It's obvious that everybody's attention span has plummeted. Mine is included in that. I think everybody's the same way, pretty much. And that has an effect on the sorts of things that people are reading, the way that they think, the way that they write, and those kinds of books that get published. And so I regret that too. I don't want to seem like a complete pessimist on this. There are obviously fantastic things about this connectivity that we have. And again, those during COVID have become more obvious than ever, with family all over the world for so many people, or all around Canada, or all around whatever country you're in. And to be able to connect with them, to be able to study and do the other things that we are. But anybody who is kind of a straddler, as I think I am in age-wise, anybody who has straddled the pre-internet period and the internet period, and has understood to a degree both of them, knows that despite all of the great glories and fun that we have, that there's there are fundamental aspects of the world that have gone very quickly, and I regret some of them.
I want to encourage people. I don't read too much of your piece because I can't do it justice. It's difficult when you ask an author, like a wordsmith, to kind of get into their piece. You want to let it speak for itself to a certain degree, so people can find it at globemail.com. The piece references a beautiful piece of graffiti art, references George Orwell. I can't help but think of a prominent Edmontonian, Marshall McLuhan, and his theory of the medium is the message. And I think that would, you could write a whole dissertation around that with regards to Twitter. Our audience comments have been fascinating with regards to how they've approached their social media. But I wanted to wrap with this, Tom. It's a great observation that you make, where you write, presumably you could demonstrate intellectual courage by breaking with the orthodoxy of your subculture. But even this fails. Immediately, you'd be flung over the wall into the opposing tribe. That's why liberals have been paralyzed in recent years, troubled by the excess of wokeness, but aghast at association with the opposite clan, where one's welcome hug might come from the likes of Donald Trump Jr. It's so very well said. Everything's so polarized. I even think of it with regards to how society's conditioned. Someone will be critical, for example, of a government official on a program like this, and cheerleaders for that government's opposition say, yeah! And I know people in the middle are saying, well, I'm not sure that criticizing one means endorsing another. We've got kind of a tribal mentality that it doesn't seem to me that has always been here. Maybe it's been below the surface. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that human beings do have a propensity to try to find a tribe and find the support that you can gain from that. But it's particularly acute if you feel threatened. And quite aside from the kind of dogpiling we were talking about, I think that generally the situation, the world that we're in right now, it feels like there are a lot of threats around. People feel insecure about the future, about the environment, about many things that we have every reason to worry about. And I think that if you can find comforting groups, then it's natural that we do. And the internet obviously shoves us into these very narrow groups. And one of the casualties of all of this is nuance and intent, and something that you alluded to before. I think that one of the sad things about a lot of the disputes, or particularly the online mobs that turn against somebody for having said something, is that intent is really not considered sufficiently. And who hasn't said the wrong thing? Who hasn't said a foolish thing that was poorly understood in the context? And you said something that was understood exactly as you intended it, but afterwards you realized that didn't represent your views. It didn't represent you in any way you wanted to. And right now, the internet is simultaneously very, very fleeting medium in that everything's just rushing out and it feels like it doesn't matter, but it's also indelible. And so you have this strange paradox where people feel that they can say things and it doesn't really matter, but you can never quite escape it. And I think that's underscored by the fact that there's a tendency now to assume that you can't qualify or explain yourself or even maybe seek forgiveness now and then for having just said the wrong thing, that if you somehow fall afoul, then you are foul, and that's it. And I think that that's a foolish way to run a conversation, a debate, or a serious society.
Tom, we're so grateful that you were able to check in this morning. I guess the afternoon for you, we certainly appreciate it. I want to let our audience know that they can find your piece, theglobeandmail.com. Where is intellectual courage in the age of Twitter? And, of course, you can find Tom Rackman tweeting uneasily on Twitter at Tom Rackman. Thank you for this.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Nice to be on the show.
Much appreciated. Encourage you to give him a follow and really encourage you to read the piece. He gets into, I don't want to spoil it, but a young literary luminary raised in Mussolini's Italy. And he takes us back to that time and through the Second World War and talks about intellectual courage. And it's just a great read. And I'm so grateful. And a shout out to my pal Chris Duncan, who put this on my radar, and he's a big fan of Real Talk, and it means a lot to know that he's tuned in. The team at Local Waste right now wants to remind you that whether it's a small business or a small retail operation or a big shopping mall you're getting set to open, or maybe you're taking a look at the garbage or waste management contracts you have, you're going, these big faceless companies aren't giving us the attention that we demand and deserve as loyal clients and customers. Well, at Local Waste, they operate on a first-name basis. Chris and Lauren would love to talk trash with you. They'd love to earn your business. Give them a call at 780-242-9746. Find them online at localwaste.ca. And a big heads up, a shout-out to those of you living in the Metro Edmonton region. Heck, I don't care if you're in Red Deer. I don't care if you are in Wabamun. I don't care if you are in Fort Saskatchewan's a bad example because they have their very own Friesen Brothers. I guess the point I'm making is I don't care if it's a 45-minute drive to get to the Anthony Henday at Rabbit Hill Road March 5th or any day after that. You're going to want to do that because Friesen Brothers is opening its new flagship store in South Edmonton. This is going to turn the grocery game upside down in Alberta's capital region.
Kelly's birthday is March 7th.
Oh, Sam.
So I'm going to cook something spectacular from that new store.
Yeah. Well, but here's the thing. You don't have to cook it.
Ooh, but I like cooking.
Okay. Well, you can do
fair.
that.
But yeah, I mean,
they do have
tell me about their Red Seal chefs.
They do. They're going to love you. You're trying to get a gift basket. Sam, we see right through exactly what you're doing. You're trying to get a free gift basket from. Now they do have. Okay, so I'm gonna on the fly change my messaging. If you are cooking dinner for your sweetheart, Friesen Brothers has all the fresh, Alberta-grown, Alberta-produced ingredients you need. Whether it's Alberta beef, pork, turkey, chicken, Alberta milled flour, whether it's Alberta produce, whenever possible, Friesen Brothers has you covered. For more than 60 years, Friesen Brothers, Alberta-grown, Alberta-owned. There you go. That turned into 2.5 minutes. And now Kelly knows what she's getting for her birthday. So pressure's on, pal. Nobody would blame you for going for their braised beef short rib. That's tell them Jespo sent you, the braised beef short rib. All right, before we get to our ag roundtable, I'm assuming the three of them are patiently waiting, set to go. Okay, well, why don't we get into the news? We'll take a look at what's making headlines right now. This first story, I don't even know what to make of this. I don't even know what is going on with Reddit Wall Street Bets. Has anybody else been paying attention to this? Has anybody been paying attention to what's been going on right now on the stock market? Who takes credit for this? Gen Z? Millennials? Who takes credit for this?
I love this story.
This is wild. So you've been paying attention probably. I mean, if you're watching markets and they're just all over the place right now, a flurry of retail investors they're flocking to stocks that really nobody's wanted recently, with due respect. Bed Bath & Beyond and GameStop and even Nokia. U.S. listed shares for Nokia spiked as much as 40% yesterday. On Thursday, today, in pre-market trading, they were down they're coming back down to earth, about 13-15%. In a statement yesterday, Nokia says it wasn't aware of any material or corporate developments, quote, that would account for the recent increase in the market price of trading volume of its shares. In other words, the company itself is going, we have no idea why there's all this interest. That's corporate speak for we're actually not doing anything all that great right now. We don't know. AMC Theaters, like GameStop, these stocks are spiking.
Everything that was big 15 years ago.
Yeah. And it's funny, but it's not. And it's
Nokia, AMC,
BlackBerry
GameStop.
was all over the place yesterday. And then the institutional investors are saying we require more regulation. And then everybody else, cheekily is saying, oh, really? Now that we figured out how to game the system, instead of just you gaming the system, now we need more regulation, do we? Anyway, I'll promise you this. These are just preliminary observations, but a lot of you right now, for example, like Viek Zhu, pardon me if I'm mispronouncing, wrote in to say, Jespo, please tell me you've left space to talk about this on the show. Like, this is unreal. We're going to reach out to somebody that knows more than me to make sense of this. I promise you that by tomorrow or the next day. And we're, of course, keeping a keen eye on what's going on. Also wanted to put on your radar, this is interesting. Today, the Bell Let's Talk movement. I know that many people have opinions about the movement. I'm happy to hear them. Yesterday, we were proud to bring you an hour of what I thought was really meaningful conversation on mental health. Well, the heavy psychological toll of pandemic life is evidencing itself in the numbers. Data released just a short time ago from Canadian police agencies coming together in partnership with the Ontario Medical Association show a surge in mental health needs across the country. In fact, Statistics Canada compiled their numbers gathered from 19 different police forces serving 70% of the Canadian population. So we've got a pretty good sense here of what we're talking about. Police reported crime was down by 18% through the first 8 months of the pandemic. We're talking Canada-wide, but calls for service increased by 8%. In other words, there was a rush of calls for mental health. Compared with the same period from the previous year, 2019 into 20, police fielded 13% more calls for general well-being checks and 12% more requests to respond to people in emotional crisis or apprehensions under the Mental Health Act. All of this to say, call someone today. Call someone if you need to talk. Call someone that might need to talk. Call someone you haven't talked to in a while. Send someone a text. Reconcile with somebody. Support somebody. Somebody you know is struggling. 5 minutes or a text message could turn someone's day around. It's not that simple, I know. But do something today in reflection of these trends. I'm going to do the same. I'll make you that promise. Let's get to our agricultural experts. This is a roundtable that we've promised you, and I'm very much looking forward to a conversation with Brittany Hennig and Sean Haney and Jeff None for the next hour. Each one of them brings a different perspective to the field, no pun intended. Each one of them an agricultural expert. Let's introduce Brittany first. Brittany Hennig, currently working toward her grad degree in plant sciences at the University of Alberta, studying integrated pest management strategies of clubroot of canola. She's been working in ag for a decade now, spending the last 4 years specifically on canola agronomic research and extension. Brittany, you and I have been talking for about 2 months now about this ag roundtable. It's finally here. Welcome to Real Talk. It might seem some people look outside and see the snow and ice and say it's kind of a weird time to be talking about ag. Why is it important to you that we be having this discussion today?
Well, actually, it's great. It's very timely to talk about misinformation in agriculture, and that's something I'm very passionate about. So really looking forward to this conversation.
Let's welcome our other panelists to the fold. Shaun Haney, if you follow ag media, you know exactly who Shaun is. He's the founder of Real Agriculture, manages one of the leading industry ag media companies for Canadian farmers and ranchers at realagriculture.com. He also hosts Real Ag Radio, which is broadcast across North America on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. It runs daily at 2:30 Mountain, 4:30 Eastern. Shaun, you and I have spoken before. I've never been able to so proudly and openly promote a competitor to terrestrial radio before, but now I can pump your tires like you wouldn't believe. Welcome to Real Talk.
I love it, Jespo. Great stuff, man. Hey, thanks a lot for having us on the show here today. And thanks a lot for focusing on an industry that is so important to the province of Alberta as well as the country of Canada. I really appreciate you bringing some attention to it.
Well, you bet. And my plan is once we've introduced my good pal, Jeff None, I'm going to kind of get out of the way. Aside from generally directing these conversations, I'd like to really have the three of you almost take it over. And I know that we'll have strong participation from our audience as well. Our third panelist today, I've known for many years. I consider him to be a close and dear friend. He has served in our previous radio show as our official volunteer agricultural correspondent. The pay has always been lousy for Jeff None, but his contributions have been massive. Jeff and his wife Coralie and their two beautiful kids own and operate Lakeside Farmstead. Used to just be a dairy operation, but that's far from that now. Jeff, of course, behind some amazing beef, Wagyu Holstein beef, and their brand new cheesery as well, and so much more. Jeff, it's really, really cool to bring you here, your first appearance on Real Talk. Thanks for making time for us today.
Oh, it's exciting to make the debut, Ryan. Hopefully I got some of the technology right.
I noticed that your background there, that's new. That big, I don't know what you call that, but that big decal behind you, it's a new logo. It's essentially new branding for your family's operation. Why don't you talk us? Why don't you give us a bit of a hint? I teed this up for our audience a while ago. I let them know that you and I go way back. We first met talking about the dairy business. I've since seen your family's journey through the highs and the lows. Not to start on a low note, but you and your family recovered from a devastating fire. What was it, Jeff? I think about 3 years now.
A little over 3.
Little over 3 years. But there have been many wins too. The highs and the lows of family business that is agriculture. What's one of the things you think that we need to focus on today as we have a meaningful conversation on Canada's producers?
I think in the larger picture, there's so many topics, and even listening to your last guest, your little news splash on what's going on in the stock markets with this GameStop business. I mean, agriculture is so dynamic. It's amazing every time I jump on your show. Like, I wanted to jump into all those conversations because they happen in agriculture. They're relevant in agriculture. We deal with it in agriculture. As far as our own commodity markets have been rallying like crazy. A little more fundamentals behind it, but lots of the pitfalls and risks are there. When your guest Tom said to head out to the country and turn off your phone, I kind of chuckled because often our phones are not working out here in the country. Internet and connections can be a problem. You name it. So for me today, I guess this is a great panel. I've known Shaun for a while, and Brittany's got a lot to contribute. So we'll see where it goes. But there's so many things from on-farm safety and ideas around that I have. And then consumer based, and that's really the brand behind you and what we do with the beef. And for me, connecting and communicating with consumers and trying to get that food as directly in their hands so that my voice and my story and our story here at the farm lands a little bit better on that.
Okay, well, let me say this. So I really do want to encourage you. I'm going to throw this question over to Brittany, and then I'm going to kind of get out of the way and encourage you all to interact with one another. You know way more about what we're talking about than I possibly could. But Brittany, I suppose in ag, like in any other business, there's probably an importance of fact and science, obviously. And then probably opinion as well. I would imagine if you talk to some veteran farmers on the best way to do something, you're probably going to have some pretty strong opinions that might vary. We do live in the age of information, and you might argue in the age of misinformation. So I thought it was interesting that was what you touched on in introducing yourself to our audience, misinformation in agriculture. Why don't we start our conversation there? What's on your radar right now, and why do you think it's such an important topic for discussion?
Yeah, so, and I want to start by saying that I am from an acreage, I'm not from a farm. I grew up more in an urban setting, and I caught myself, I specifically remember the one incident of going to the grocery store and finding organic spinach and thinking like, this is definitely nutritious. It's more expensive, but it's better for me. And I couldn't afford it at that point. I was a student, but that's what I believed was correct. And so through schooling, I switched from pre-vet over to crop sciences, and not only learning about GMOs, organic production, basically how our food is produced. Through the school system, I also just talked to my colleagues and coworkers, the farmers that actually grew the food. And I realized not that I was upset, but I was so astonished that there is so much misinformation about our food, specifically around being scared, which I don't think we need to be at all in Canada. And just, I found kind of like my passion in my everyday life, trying to educate people on where their food comes from and food labels. So I don't know, do you want me to dive into specifically my opinions on GMOs?
That's all I want. All I want is your opinions today, and I want to, and I'd love to hear it, and then I'd love for Sean to take it over, because we have what I love is that we've got a prominent. I mean, Sean knows ag, but Sean knows media and messaging too. So when it comes to information and misinformation, I'm sure he'll have a take on this. But Brittany, yeah, dive right in, because I know Jeff loves talking GMOs too.
Okay, so and to be frank, I did not actually learn about the differences in what I'm about to talk to you until my graduate research, taking a genetics course and then sitting in a room with geneticists. So GMOs is a misused term. And so when we actually break down that acronym, it's genetically modified organism. It's any organism that's genetics have been modified. So we can go back into 8,000 to 9,000 years ago, and we had the farmer breeder selecting specific seeds from crops that worked well for them and then replanting those. And so already back then we were modifying our genes to be more productive. And so when we look at specifically GMOs, and it gets confusing, but you think of like GMOs as like the top part of the whole chain. And then we can go into conventional and unconventional breeding methods. Conventional would be like just crossing two plants, whereas unconventional, we look at more of the genes and the DNA of the plants. But that's where we get into, our quote unquote GM canola, which is a genetically modified organism, but it's specifically a transgenic. And it's just a different breeding technique used to create a specific type of canola. We have non-GMO canola and we have GM canola. But looking at, our seedless watermelon is technically a GMO. Our red grapefruit is technically a GMO. We've modified the genes. I don't know if you remember white grapefruit, it's now red. Papayas are all transgenics because the papaya ring virus was attacking them. And if it wasn't for transgenic papayas, we wouldn't have papayas on our shelves anymore. And so when we look in the future, our bananas, our citrus oranges from Florida are at threat. And I think it's something that, because it's so complex, there's so many different breeding techniques, it's scary. And it's so easy to see the syringe into the tomato, and that's a GM.
Yeah, and I don't want to discount people's concerns at all. But Sean, is it fair to say that when someone invokes the name, Monsanto, for example, and they say, well, Monsanto's behind this, and then everybody goes, oh, ooh, right? And everybody gets all whipped into a frenzy. I'm sure you must hear it all the time as a radio host.
Our audience is pretty tuned in on these things because they're in the industry. But, I think one thing, Monsanto doesn't even exist anymore. They were bought by Bayer a couple of years ago. So people that bring up Monsanto and some of the supposed evil things they are doing, they're not even a thing. So we need to recognize that. I think, Ryan, there's probably some people hearing what Brittany said and saying, oh, I just do not trust science on this one. I'm sorry. I know there's some sort of nefarious thing underway here. The reality is some of those same people that are saying that are also probably in the chat on your show saying, why won't Premier Kenney believe in the science? Why are these governments not following the science on COVID? Science. But then when it comes to their food, they're doing kind of the opposite in terms of their belief in science. And I think it's one of the struggles we have right now is there's so many versions of science out there. Social media, going back to what your prior guest said, social media really plays a negative part in this, where there is a lot of conspiracy theories out there that spin completely out of control, and they're really hard to contain. And it's really, really difficult in a time where people have more information than ever. It is a real challenge for agriculture to kind of get through that noise and really talk about some of the good things that it's doing, especially when it comes to the food that's showing up at the grocery store. I'll make one more point. Consumers need to be very, very aware of the marketing that happens at the grocery store. And there's a lot of things that are on labels that are, quite frankly, really based on fear-based marketing. And I really encourage people to reach out to producers like Jeff and ask questions and get some of the information, especially when it comes to things like dairy and beef products. There is a lot of misinformation out there on the food that's on the store shelf.
Well, dairy and beef, Nonay, that's your game.
And store shelves, right? I'm learning that's a steep learning curve, the information, how you get in there, what retailers are looking for, what works. So yeah, I mean, agriculture is always a tremendous learning curve. For me, I can't even think. I don't think at this point I'm so immersed in it, and the curve is so steep that I don't know that I can do justice to my experience bringing a product to market in that aspect. My take a little bit on the GMOs and just building off of what Brittany and Sean said is that there are problems with some of what GMO has brought us in the form of monoculture, and making it easier to focus on just a couple of commodities. But I think the future is not to throw that technology out, but to see how that technology can help us in our efforts with regenerative ag, which is a big movement, understanding it, talking about it, how it works in northern Alberta versus central Alberta and the opportunities around the world, because it isn't a one size fits all, and you need the boots on the ground and the expertise of the farmers that are in that area and know their ground and know their what they're up against for all their risks to bring all of this together. And I think there's some exciting things coming in the future, but it's going to be bits and pieces of everything. There's no way that GMOs are being thrown out. Parts of the world are backing off on their support of it, but at the same time, it's a huge part of how we're going to make sure we have enough food around.
Jeff, you have how many head of cattle would you have in your operation now? Like 300, something like that?
We're milking in the 170 range. So that means 300 in the dairy replacement program and about 160, 180 beef animals that are on their way through the system.
Okay, so let me ask you this. In other words, your way around cattle. Kim is watching, and she says we can have the same conversation when it comes to misunderstandings around antibiotics in cattle. Antibiotics are humane and healthy for animals, and they are not harmful for human consumption. It might be the burger joints that are most to blame for this. The antibiotic or whatever steroid-free beef, however they market themselves. What's your take on that? I would imagine you have an opinion. You're in the beef game.
Every region has a different program for that. Antibiotics are same story. Like there's a purpose and a tool for them in agriculture. You have organics and the people that are able to work with less of it and use different methods and different treatments. We are so aware of it in agriculture. We had a discussion yesterday that was out for his every 2-week visit on our herd health check, and the discussion was around treating some disease in the herd, use of antibiotics. Boiling it down to understand what we're actually doing. We're not out here throwing antibiotics at every problem. We sample all of our milk regularly. I'm actually involved in a project right now where those samples are then sent, and we're spinning off on digging down to the DNA level to identify what pathogens are actually there, so we have a better understanding of what we're treating, how to treat it, and in a lot of cases, understanding how to build the health side of the program in our nutrition and our animal husbandry to make sure that we don't have to use antibiotics. And,
right.
I'm involved in, I almost feel like I need to make a disclaimer on every step here because I'm invested also in a probiotic company that we're looking at specifically that, using probiotics to enhance the immune system of the cow so that we can purposely use less antibiotics in the future. So,
yeah,
there's so much going on in ag.
Hey, Ryan, one of the things I think comes up here is that, a lot of your audience I'm sure is concerned about climate change. Well, one of the things that allows us to sequester more carbon in the soil and reduce greenhouse gas emissions is no-till, not cultivating, not disturbing the soil. And one of the tools that we use to be able to do that is having access to some GM technologies. And so I think it's a really, really positive step to connect some of these dots on some of the positive things that some of this technology provides us, especially when it comes to fighting climate change.
Brittany, I want to return to climate change and to give our audience a sense of what's coming up and our panelists as well. I'd really like to get into a post-pandemic look at ag, an assessment of what this pandemic has done to the industry and how we grow our way or build our way out of it. I'd like to talk to you about the Biden presidency and what that means for trade and what's on your radar. But Brittany, yourself as a scientist and a researcher, we've got some interesting questions and comments here from viewers on our Real Talk live chat on YouTube. Corinne, for example, says plant-based meats or plant-based proteins. Is this a fad? Is it a real healthy alternative? That's a great question. And how about this point from Daniel, who says, there's money. We talked about this a little bit just a few shows ago. Money's getting cut from our institutions, and it's a big issue when it comes to research on things like livestock breeding, better plant productivity, whatever the case may be. As a researcher yourself, is that something that's on your radar? Is that something that concerns you?
Insofar as research, I specifically work within canola right now. I don't know if I can, I guess maybe I can speak for the industry as a whole. There has been a lot of changes, I don't know.
Let me ask from your perspective and your opinion based on your job and what you're doing. Do you believe that enough of an emphasis or enough support is being allocated for research when it comes to crop science? I mean, imagine a lot of it is industry funded, just like in any other industry. But is it a healthy future in that context?
Specifically for myself, I work with canola, and I would say, I mean, hey, we're never opposed to more research, but I do think the canola industry has a lot of research underway right now, and it isn't just industry funded, it is grower funded, and I think specifically for canola, we have a lot of research going and a lot of really cool, interesting, whether it's for medical advancements for your health or for the farmer. And again, like I said, a lot of it is farmer funded.
Yeah.
Hey, Ryan, I saw Ross McKenzie was on your show.
Yeah.
Was it on? I believe it was on a Monday. And Ross has a point of view that he's very upset about the government cuts to the Alberta research budget for agriculture. But and I think that's warranted. There should be concern. A lot of the responsibility here has been transferred over to somebody that a lot of people in the industry have a lot of respect for. That is Dr. David Chalik. He is heading up ARDAR, and I think the big watch here is what research looks like in the future in Alberta when it comes to agriculture. It's not going to be the same. It is different. Some of the opposition to some of those cuts is more about opposition to change as opposed to what the final outcome is. So I think the jury is really still out. Some of that research is being funneled and pushed towards academic institutions like Olds College, University of Lethbridge, University of Alberta. I think people can accept that, or at least it's not all negative. There is changes afoot. This government is definitely not wanting to be in the business of agricultural research, so to speak.
And I think from a producer standpoint, every industry I'm involved with, from the potato industry, dairy, all the grain, every time I move anything, beef included, there's a checkoff. There's levy dollars that are put to the industry, and our industries have boards and producer-run think tanks where that's where we decide what to do with those dollars. And I think it's following more of a model where the government, you can design research projects and get funding through grants rather than having these branches. Having said that, the other side that didn't touch on that show that you did is the other role of some of these government agencies and some of these people that are employed in it. It's not just research and grain. We have inspectors on the federal level that come out and are critical to me and our industry being able to move potatoes into the U.S. and maintain relationships with the FDA and cross-border stuff. On the larger scale, here with the cheese plant, we have federal and provincial inspectors at this point in time that make sure, and it's every processing plant around the province. Meat inspection, when we go to my abattoir, The dairy, I have a different inspector. And I know in all of these cases, this isn't all of a sudden out of nowhere. They've been getting cuts, they've been getting pressure, they've been having less resources, larger areas. And these are people that are a third party designed to come and make sure that the regulations and what we're trying to do in the industry is being adhered to on every farm. And those kinds of things need to be paid attention to, because you can't cut all of that out and still have the consumers trust that we are following all the rules that are agreed to.
I'd love to talk about consumer trust. I think this is important. Let me just check in on our live chat here. For example, Daniel says, if I had to run my feedlot without antibiotics, it would have been a very short existence. Unseen Stranger says probiotics over antibiotics. Nice. Mark has an interesting question. Jeff, this is just some insight into you running your business or expanding your business and opening the cheesery. We don't have to get too into the weeds on this, but I think people would be interested to know what's involved. Mark says, I'm curious to know if the milk for the cheese has to go through the dairy board, or can it come directly from the cows without a third person? What's involved with that? Is that a seamless operation for you, or do you have you had to go through your own red tape reduction? Is it a bit of a disaster trying to get that launched?
Yes and no. Physically simple. The milk comes, we haul it across the yard a couple 100 feet, and we're able to use single source right from our own farm with all the benefits of that. Our nutritional program, how we care for the land, all of that has an impact on, what makes our cheese and our final product so special. From a regulatory standpoint and from how the dairy industry works in Canada, we report as a processing plant that we've bought that milk, we test it, we act exactly like any other processor in any other region, whether they're getting milk hauled to them from a group of producers or from a single source. So all of our billing is done actually through Canadian Dairy, and subject to all of the categories and pricing depending on what we use the milk for. So if we make different types of cheese, we literally report exactly what those liters were used for, butter, and they all have different pricing schemes. So it's an interesting business model on the process side, on the cheese side, because decisions are, it's very different. I don't have, there's other things on it. So yes, we do purchase through the pool.
Brittany, I want to talk about climate change, and I'm sure that each of the three of you are going to have different interpretations or different applications of what this means, but people in cities care about climate change, farmers and producers care about climate change, residents of rural communities care, but maybe have different perspectives on the best way to address it, et cetera. How does awareness of climate change impact your research, Brittany? And what's your bigger perspective with regards to, its application to conversations like these?
Yes, we actually just had an event last week where we had two researchers present on, the effects of climate change on our crops. And so we're going to have increased temperatures and we're not going to have more moisture. And so this is a fact coming to ag that we need to be able to adapt to these changes within the climate. And I will say I don't know a lot of the nitty gritty to the policies and how different government and how the carbon tax, for instance. I don't know a lot of information on that, but I can speak on that farmers, they know they need the environment to grow their crops. And so this is a new challenge, maybe not a new challenge, but this is a very daunting challenge, changing our practices. And we are already very, I'd say, environmentally friendly, but taking the next step to becoming more environmentally friendly, not only is it daunting, it's costly, and it's just a big change, but farmers also realize that it needs to happen. So the transition period, I'd say, is very critical.
Well, and Sean, Brittany shows courage there in dropping those two words, carbon tax. Because I know, I even think I don't have to go too far. My cousin Corey, who Jeff knows well, sent me one of his utility bills. I think after they had been drying some grain last year, and he was like, "You want to know why some producers are so ticked off about the carbon tax? Here's why." And he had that line circled there. Mm-hmm. But when we talk about climate change and the environment, I'm asking you such a broad question. But what's your perspective on it as someone who has a pulpit?
Well, I think farmers and ranchers across this country are concerned about the environment. They are people that are concerned about the impacts of climate change. How we tackle it, though, is really under dispute. And this federal government, obviously, climate's very important to them. But the reality is that they have taken the stick approach instead of a carrot. And the tax is an easy way to tackle it. I think I would argue that it's rather ineffective, especially when it comes to industries like agriculture, where there isn't a substitute, right? Farmers are trying to cut costs all the time when it comes to the input side. So they just don't burn fuel for the sake of burning fuel. They just don't dry grain because they're looking for something to do in November. These are actual hard costs, and the grain drying is a good example where, in Ontario, where grain drying for corn is really a must. You're looking at people at this new carbon tax they're talking about by 2030 being $170 a ton. We're looking at something between maybe 40 to 50 bucks an acre in cost. It's unreasonable, and the federal government has been very unwilling at all to bend and provide exemptions to farmers in the areas where there isn't a substitute activity to really kind of reduce some of that carbon output. And the government's not really listening to agriculture on this one at all, and it's quite ideological in the way they've gone about it. And farmers, to be quite honest, across the country are very, very upset about the carbon tax because of the cost load it is going to put onto their shoulders. They're paying the tax, and then individual citizens are going to get the rebate checks. It's some argue it's pretty much a wealth transfer.
So just to add on to some of the numbers, so if it is a $50 cost per acre, that is 100% of the profit in a lot of cases, and sometimes more than that. So there's not that many dollars in operating a grain farm. I think the other side of it is that agriculture is starting to be viewed, and there's a lot of people out there that are looking into how agriculture is actually the solution. And whether it's the grasslands and the bee farmers who are out there, and that's part of the ecosystem and sequestering carbon in the ground and measuring, not just relative to where we were, but the fact that it is probably one of the largest potential carbon sinks out there, and as in agriculture not getting credit. We run a compost project, we get more efficient because we have to be from an economic standpoint, and now we're being looked at as no credit for what we've done at an environmental viewpoint and in the carbon world, but just piling on more cost, which is we've already made the adjustments, we've already got more efficient because we'd be out of business. And now they're taking and piling on more costs, which put us in that position again of being cash flow negative.
Okay, so let me ask you this. So Kim says, so hang on. So a carbon tax is good, but it's not properly thought out with regards to the industry. Would anyone agree with that assessment? I mean, what if you were to? I know Brittany said you don't really want to get into policy unless you change your mind. But Sean or Jeff, I mean, do you have what you think if you were tapped on the shoulder and named agriculture minister right now? Sean, would you have an idea on what you might replace that, or how you might tweak the carbon tax, or what you might do to make a meaningful impact on man's impact, humankind's impact on climate change? While at the same time keeping farming as a potentially profitable enterprise?
I think we really have to invest in the innovation side. We have to find technologies and bring innovations to commercialization that allow industries like agriculture to reduce their carbon footprint and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Just penalizing with a cost doesn't make any sense to me. You're not deterring anybody from anything. You're just basically adding taxes onto an industry. So I believe more in the let's work on funding innovations and providing. We're looking for industries in Alberta, right? The oil and gas really struggling. We can't get pipelines built. This is an area where we really should be investing, because in the long run, those are the technologies that we need to fight climate change, not just punishing our Canadian citizens with another tax.
So I think as a producer, where we're at, how we've always done things and how we've adapted is about to get a huge shakeup, and there's evidence of it out there. And I don't know if this will grab and the conversation will continue, or if this is an endpoint of it. But in the last few months, you have huge players out there that are investing in agriculture, and they're not going to sit with the status quo. Bill Gates is the largest landholder in the US, obviously probably North America right now. He's not investing in land because, I would think as a side project. He believes there's a play there where it probably fits into a larger environmental ideas that he has, and he's looking for how that's going to get shaken up and how things are going to be operated. And in Canada, it's not new, like how farms are owned and how they're operated. So we're talking about producers executing at the same time that we're having massive investments. TELUS just bought a company that's involved in technology and data-driven decisions, and heavily looking to agriculture and putting their stamp on it and delivering us, information that can probably help us make decisions. I imagine that's the goal, that's going to have benefits for the environment as well.
I better read a tweet. I'm taking a look at the Real Talk RJ hashtag, and Jeff, your partner in life and your partner on the farm, is tweeting at us live here. So I better read Coralie's tweet.
I was going to try to see how to fit that in, Ryan. So I'm glad you're jumping in.
Well, I got you covered, because if we ignore her, that's your problem. Coralie says, to be clear, there are no antibiotics in any meat. There's a withdrawal time frame before butchering or milk. She says any cows being treated, the milk is diverted to a different tank or disposed of. It's also illegal in Canada to use hormones to increase milk production.
She is, 100%. And I guess it's missed by me because it is second native. Those are just no-fly zones, right?
Right.
And in the GMO world, same thing. Like any herbicides we use, any technology we use, the residual is a huge component of that product being registered and how we farm and how our trading partners in the end engage with us and allow us to provide them with food. I mean, there's no residual. I think Brittany can speak to that on the GMO and the regulatory side of things, maybe with that product, that the technology's there, but there's things in place to make sure that it's safe.
I want to ask the three of you about the future of agriculture and what that looks like post-COVID, as well as with the Biden administration. Very quickly, though, want to take a look at the hashtag Real Talk RJ, powered by Park Power. Barry Fearnley's watching this morning. Barry tweets from the Goat Barn. He says, if people expect everyone to believe in vaccine science, they should also believe in food science. That from Barry Fearnley. Appreciate Barry chiming in. Of course, as mentioned, our hashtag is powered by the team at Park Power. Since 2013, Park Power has been operating right here in Alberta, providing electricity, natural gas, and internet, even to rural communities. And right now they want your business, so much so that they've got a promo code that when you swing by parkpower.ca, whether it's a big farming operation, whether it's a commercial operation here in one of the urban centers, or whether it's your own residence, if you use the promo code 2021-Real Talk at parkpower.ca, they're going to give you $70 off your first bill at parkpower.ca. We're also very proud to be partnering with Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. I'll retweet this later because I want to make a comment on it, but I love this photo that's just been sent in to us. One of our audience members, I'm not going to spoil the surprise, I'm going to show you later in the day, he says, this is my first dilly bar in 20 years, and he's just hammering down on this thing. Dilly bars, boxes of 6 are 2 for 1 right now at Dairy Queens in Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park, but you got to tell them you're a real talker. Bring 2 of those dilly bar boxes up to the till. Let them know that you watch Real Talk or you check out the podcast later in the day, and they'll give you that 2 for 1 deal. Our thanks to the team at DQ. Brittany Hennig, Sean Haney, and Jeff None are our ag panelists this morning. We're grateful to have them here. And I want to leave the question general on purpose. Brittany, when we take a look at the future of agriculture, whether it's the future of science, whether it's relations, the economic and trade relationship between Canada and the U.S., whether it's coming out of COVID in a healthy direction, what's one thing that's on your radar, either as an area of concern or maybe something you're optimistic or excited about when you look to the future of where this industry is going?
Okay, so as much as I'd like to talk positively, what I'm really concerned about for the industry is regulations on the use of our technology, whether that's, we see it in Mexico, the removal of GM corn, phasing that out. We see the removal of different pesticides from the market. And I think ultimately we need to look at other countries and maybe learn from their actions and implement those into our system. And, when we look at the EU and the UK specifically, and again, canola is more of my wheelhouse, we look at insects that, when we ban insecticides, we place heavier usage on other pesticides. And then that causes resistance to pop up to these insecticides that were once working but aren't. And so specifically in the UK, there's areas that cannot grow oilseed rape anymore, which is canola. just a different name for them over there. And they can't actually grow it because of such horrible insect issues with the cabbage stem flea beetle, and they can't use actual the insecticides that work on them. Across the EU, there's a pollen beetle that's devastating oilseed rape crops. Huge resistance to pyrethroids that are available to them, but they cannot use, and I guess the chemical I'm talking about is neonicotinoids. Those have been banned. And these are insecticides that, farmers don't like to use. Like, it's not like they go and they spray it on every acre with every pass. Not only are they expensive, but it's just insecticides are not something that we want to use. We not only destroy the pests that we're after, but also the beneficials around us. So yeah, and especially in Western Canada, we use neonicotinoids on our seed treatment, so below ground. Specifically in Alberta, we haven't seen any negative effects of neonicotinoids on the bee population specifically, which is a pretty hot topic. But that is one chemical that is, under threat, and it's a huge, basically, resource for us.
Sean,
So
is that
Ryan, put it this way, like what Brittany brings up is a really good point. You create regulations so strict in your domestic market that you're essentially forced to import the product from other places around the world. And that's what's happened with winter rapeseed. And they have had a couple of years of poor growing conditions as well. But Canada has done very good business exporting canola into the EU specifically because of the fact their restrictions are just so strong domestically. I think it's word to the wise in Canada to pay attention to those kinds of strong regulations that really hurt your own domestic agricultural industry.
I wish I am not doing justice to the Real Talk live chat right now. It's its own animal this morning, which is amazing. Some of the comments on here. Unseen Stranger says, okay, so we need to find other methods of pest control, like avoiding monoculture crops or using natural predators or something else. Are they onto something?
Well, that's the beneficial insects that Brittany was just talking about. Those are some of the things that farmers are really, really paying attention to in terms of the time when they are applying those kinds of insecticide products to make sure they are not hurting and damaging some of the beneficial insects that are working inside that canopy for free for farmers, and really paying attention to the ecosystem. That stuff is happening now.
Okay, so Sean, let me ask you the same question I asked Brittany. Generally, when it comes to the future of agriculture, obviously the immediate future will be, what does it look like post-pandemic? What sort of shakeups has the industry seen? How do we recover? How do we support our producers? And then another big one, obviously, there's a new resident in the Oval Office, and what does that mean for trade? Joe Biden will promise his own approach to America first, which will be different than Donald Trump's, but will still, I'm sure, have implications. What does the future of ag look like through your lens?
Yeah, so let's start with the Biden administration. So I wrote back in September that really, really wondering if Democrats in the U.S. were pulling the wool over the eyes of Canadians. Donald Trump, former president, had very, very poor approval ratings in Canada. He really only made one visit. It was part of the G7 summit. He really did not make an official visit to Canada because of some of that low rating. And I wonder if the Biden administration will be as friendly to Canada as people are perceiving. There was a lot of Canadians cheering for Biden to win the presidency, but that's because they were so anti-Trump. And listen, there's a lot of reasons to be negative on the Trump file from a Canadian perspective. What have we seen the last week? No surprise, Keystone. You've been covering that. Keystone canceled. We've also got talk about some of the things happening with this Buy America campaign when it comes to U.S. government procurement contracts. There's going to be some challenges under the USMCA that have to do with that. We're not off to a great start, but the reality is that Biden provides Trudeau a total cover on climate policy. So they had to be somewhat measured when our biggest trading partner was the Trump administration. Now they are lock and step when it comes to environmental policy with Biden's administration. And so this is really a free wheel now. These are two governments that are going to really try to outdo each other. Who's doing more about the climate? And it's going to be like this, like going up like this. We're going to start to hear things about carbon tariffs, carbon adjustments, where we're basically putting taxes on products coming into the country that maybe don't have the same climate policies as we do. So I think that's one of the big changes here, is that Biden gives Trudeau cover on climate policy.
I want to point out a very important contribution to this discussion on our live chat from Shane Pelche, who asks, Jeff, I'm not sure, as a producer yourself, as a dairy farmer, do you know what you call a cow with no legs?
Nope.
Ground beef.
Ground beef, Brittany. That's 2 points for you, Brittany. Ground beef.
Well,
Jeff, what?
My mind was teeing up this question that you're about to ask.
Yeah. So, hey, the future of Ag 3. I mean, has COVID-19? I feel like your farm, as mentioned, you've encountered adversity over the past number of years. You've also bounced back in a big way. You've expanded with a really bold spirit. What impact has the pandemic had on your operation, if anything?
Well, right out of the gate in the spring when everything was shut down, it impacted our farm. From what I'm gathering around the potato world, probably a little bit harder just based on where I had contracts and how I was set up. But we had $300,000 of seed potatoes that were sold, were in heavy demand, and ended up in a compost pile and at a neighbor's cattle feedlot with absolutely no compensation whatsoever for it. So that was a big kick in the teeth, along with all the uncertainty of COVID early on. And that ripples out still. You're seeing, as things settle and consumers' patterns are somewhat stabilized through the restrictions. Some of that's coming back. So we're heading into that spring shipping season again. And it looks positive that, that's not going to be something that gets hit. Commodity markets are on fire. I started with that early on, building on what Brittany and with Sean mentioned. It's going to be really important as we move forward with Canadian agriculture that the restrictions put on Canadian producers and the regulations piled onto us are somehow accounted for when it comes to international trade, not just reducing what we can produce at home and having us import it, but how we stack up. The minimum wage debate in the US right now is important in their costs and when you compare our competitiveness. Some of these trade deals that were done with the Trump administration and the leverage that Biden's going to have to take advantage of those, while at the same time pushing his own Buy America First. The relationships that the U.S. has. I was reading this morning about their alliance with Japan and poking a stick at China and the opportunity that we're going to have to maybe focus outside of our trading relationship with the U.S. into these other countries and what that means, because China's going to have a different set of rules as far as what they're going to allow from a regulatory standpoint for us to use when it comes to GMOs. I know I traveled there a few years ago and met up with a friend that I'd met in the potato industry. He was doing some consulting work. He was a Chinese national, and they were specifically approving certain strains of GMO corn and not others. And it gets really intricate. And if they're needing to buy in the commodity world like they are in the last few months, it's a wild ride, and trying to make sure that producers can take advantage of it. It's one thing to say canola is $16 a bushel, and to put that into context, most guys were selling it at $10 when they were growing the crop less than a year ago. But you have to understand that the reason it's at 16 is because there's none there. So producers aren't able to take advantage of the current situation, and it points out and highlights to me how precarious food supply is on the macro scale. A small ripple, and you're talking about that jumping through the roof. And tying that into your news segment on this GameStop thing,
yeah,
it's not producers that are making it. It's literally, I've made money in the last month hedging and buying back, speculating on canola that I had previously sold because I felt it was going to go up. And I think the majority of the push up right now is in that world. And how do you make sure that producers are healthy in this environment, not just the people on Wall Street or the people driving this thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be a bit of a wake-up call to some people to hear from a producer like yourself that the one way that you've been able to turn a profit lately, I don't mean to mischaracterize what you're saying, but it's to play the markets. That's not what we envision a producer doing to be able to be financially viable.
Well, and different producers in different ways, and it's being able to physically sell my crop, yet maybe dabble back and forth in where this market's going and try to leverage so that I can participate in it while still running the farm. And to be clear, my most success in that space is making sure that I stick to more of a hedge strategy than a speculation strategy, because I just can't afford to take the big hits. But if I sell 1,000 tons of canola, for me to buy back 1,000 tons on paper and to dabble in that has has helped a little bit. It helps me understand the markets and maybe make better decisions for my farm moving forward. It's not a space that a lot of people are comfortable to be in and shouldn't be, because it is a ruthless place to operate because you're a small player in a very, very big game.
Let's Jeff, Brittany, and Sean, I want to actually just kind of run through. Like I said, our live chat is out of control in the best way right now, so there's no way we can do justice to all the comments and questions. But why don't I throw a few out at I'm just watching it right now at random, and I'd love to give each of you a chance. This will essentially be your. This sounds very, very fine. I was going to say your final statement here, but we've asked you for an hour of your time. I know each of you have other things to do. Heck, Sean's got to go prep for a show. Brittany's got to figure out, she's got to get back into the lab. And of course, None's got a farm to run. So how about this from Hope? Hope says, I would love to see, this might be what Jeff wants to take on in just a minute. Hope says, I would love to see dairy farmers start to put out more interesting products. There's something like a 300% tariff to bring in cheese from France. I want higher fat butter and cream. Jeff, I could talk for 5 minutes about your cream, but we made an Alfredo sauce with lakeside. Anyway, I don't even get me started. Prawns, and it was out of control. But that's not the point. And I don't need the microphone here. You guys do. Another says, Helen says, I vote for purchasing directly from ranchers. Several around here will do this. Valerie makes a great point, says there's a large element of our population that cannot afford higher priced protein. You got to feed our population. You've got to give people choice for what they can afford and allow them to find value. Many are talking about alternative, wondering about things like using solar for drying grain or alternative ways of powering farm. People are talking about that approach. Many are talking about, heck, we haven't even got into the health of producers, some of the health effects. We could talk about mental health in farming, which I promise our audience we will do at some point because it's a very real area that demands focus. Two Beaver says agriculture needs to do what Jesperson did. This is interesting. Get rid of millions of dollars worth of infrastructure and get back to the basics. I know we've just put a lot in front of you. Sean, what jumped out at you there?
I'm curious what back to the basics looks like. I get the comparison, I guess, but I think agriculture really has, as I look through the group chat, there's a lot of really positive comments. Of course, there are ones that are very critical of the industry. Clearly, from an ag comm standpoint, our work is not done to make sure that people understand, honestly, some of the things that are happening now, because they're very, very positive in nature. And I think a lot of people are being critical in the chat or out in the consumer or in just the world of mainstream would really be surprised on some of the stuff that is actually happening on farms today when it comes to preserving the climate, when it comes to managing beneficial insects, as we talked about before. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there about some of the things that are really Jeff is doing on his farm today. Not 5 years from now, not 10 years from now, but today. And I think that is really missed on a lot of people.
Brittany, what do you want to leave us with? Was there a comment there that jumped out at you, or is there something we didn't touch on today that you want to make sure that the audience has a chance to chew on, so to speak?
I would just like to say that, and we can only cover so much in this discussion, but to keep the conversation going and not be so scared of our food, and don't think that you always have to buy the non-GMO organic substitute that's way more expensive. I mean, if you like it, if the taste of it is great, awesome, but nutritionally, do not feel bad for consuming conventional produced food. I mean, it's just as nutritional, it's just as healthy. And don't let fear, guide your decisions. Reach out, like I said, have the discussions, and know that farmers are very smart, and a lot of them go to post-secondary education. They go to conferences back to back to learn more about how to produce higher quality and higher quantity of food. This is food that they feed their families, and I just want the population as a whole to be confident in the Canadian food industry, egg industry.
Hey, Ryan, I encourage people to be curious, right? So a lot of times people are jumping to some sort of conclusion based on what Jenny McCarthy said on TV or what Dr. Oz says. Instead of using them as your sources, be curious and actually talk to people that are working in the industry. And I think you're going to be somewhat surprised in what you find out.
Love it. Jeff, we'll give you last word. You obviously have to touch on that one comment from the one audience member that wants to see more creativity in the dairy market, because that's exactly what you're doing. But what do you want to leave us with today?
Okay, so I'll try and hit two really quick and tie it all in. Around, there is innovation. I mean, obviously our farm and our project here with having a cheese maker and developing that is evidence of that exact notion of having more innovation. I think to Brittany's point, and to kind of bring up a little bit of a stat there, 35-40% food waste. So yes, cost of food is important, but if consumers are a little bit more deliberate about making selections around quality and paying attention to the quantity that they're consuming, so you can get a higher quality product and an appropriate quantity of it, and really your spend isn't any bigger, but make sure that you're being efficient with your decisions and treat yourself to something that's maybe seems expensive on a per unit cost, but cut back on the waste. I think in agriculture, and it didn't quite hit this show, and I know I'm going to be back to talk about it more, Ryan, on collaborative efforts and some of the pressures that are out there for agriculture to do things on the farm safety front, where I think we can get together as a group and really dig into what society wants us to be doing on the farm. But at the same time, with a lot of the conversation this morning, there's so much on producers' plates. How do we do that in a way that we're not downloading this onto producers, and where the industry can really standardize things and take a little bit of pressure off of the producer?
Jeff None of Lakeside Farmstead, encourage you to follow them on Instagram. And of course, you have to try the beef and the cheese. Brittany Hennig, a crop scientist and agricultural researcher, and Sean Haney, the founder of Real Agriculture, who will be on air today, right, Sean, on Sirius XM, Rural Radio Channel 147, 2:30 Mountain, 4:30 Eastern. Is that right?
Absolutely. You can download the podcast as well. It's on Apple iTunes or Apple Podcasts and any of your favorite Android podcatchers. So everybody check it out if you want to learn something about agriculture.
Fantastic. If anything, I mean, we've accomplished a lot here. We've learned more about what Brittany's studying, what Jeff's doing, what Sean's talking about, and what his listeners are concerned about. But if anything else, we've blown the doors off the conversation. I'm just watching this Real Chat and realizing we could do this once a week. And it means a lot that the three of you cleared an hour out of your schedules for this. So thanks for joining us here on Real Talk.
Good to be back, Ryan.
There you go. That's Brittany Hennig, Sean Haney, and Jeff None. You can let me know what you think about this. Can I say I'm proud of you all? This is great. With regards to Sam, I mean, I know you're keeping an eye on the live chat as well. Some of the points being made on there. I have sort of chicken scratch. This is what my paper looks like after this. And by the way, both sides, we're doing everything we can. And did you see? I'm not ready to announce this yet. I should not announce. Well, now you're going to go, well, don't be that guy. We have a potential dance partner that has an amazing idea on how Real Talk can go carbon neutral. And I absolutely love the idea.
Ooh.
Yes, I cannot provide details at this moment.
I do too. This
However,
is a
I'm very
great
excited
idea.
because I'm not going to hide for anybody that we're using paper here. We try to be as paper free as possible, but I have a difficult time staying organized, and so we're going to find a way to go carbon neutral. But I've just been scribbling down notes. Yes, from what our three panelists were saying, but Real Talkers, from what you're saying as well, I'm going, that's a segment idea. That's a segment idea. I love it.
I think I'm on to page 7 of notes today.
Page 7.
This is, it was quite the talk.
Yeah, like Wigwith didn't get a shout out yet. Wigwith has been a regular contributor through this conversation, said it's a good conversation that Alberta needs to have, how we feed ourselves. I love this from Fatima. It says, Real Talk is going to force me to learn about ag. I love that. That's fantastic. Another says, Kim, this chat was so good. You really want to get me going on cheese puns?
But it was cow puns and then pig puns and then cheese puns.
Yeah, there was a lot
there's
going
been quite
on.
the evolution.
There was a lot going on. And I didn't even acknowledge yesterday because the live chat is its own animal. I always wonder, for folks that are, the majority of our audience, numbers-wise, checks out Real Talk later in the day by way of the podcast. That's kind of the big. And I always wonder how many of them, while they're walking their dogs or whatever, are also going to the YouTube because there's so much going on in the live chat here. But yesterday there was a big thing about raisins. Did you see this? We didn't even the live. Do we need to have a separate? We need to call you the live chatters or something? There needs to be like the chatterbox. Let's call it the chatterbox. The Real Talk Chatterbox. It's officially named Chatterbox.
Yep, that works.
Yeah, and that's not an insult, everybody. It's a compliment. But on the Chatterbox, everybody was
Let's
talking
check
about.
in on the Chatterbox.
Let's check in on the Chatterbox. Chatterbox. We could do some cool
Do
stuff.
I need a sting for that?
Can you? Hey, how about that music that we didn't use for Positive Reflections, but that we love?
Oh, yeah.
You know that
yeah,
other one?
yeah.
Do you have a hotkey for that, or would it take some time to find it?
Give me like 2 minutes.
2 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it gives me a chance to remind you. Why don't you give me the ad bed in the meantime, or does that complicate the audio feeds? This guy's so good. Samuel G. Brooks, everybody. All right. Seems like the right time to talk about Eden Landscaping, doesn't it? I mean, they're all about planting things that'll grow in your yard. Maybe not canola or barley, but you want a beautiful line of birch trees, or I'm already going to run out of creative. I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to landscape planning. The good news is they do. They've been doing it for more than 20 years, and if you check out landscapeedmonton.ca, you'll be able to view their work, and what you'll also see there is that Mike and his team at Eden Landscaping, they're not kind of a one-trick pony. In other words, not every job that they do is $200,000, though they can do those big ones. I've seen some photos. And not every job is the tiny little flower box either, but they're pretty good at those too. So these days, when it's cold out and it feels like the middle of winter, and we know that you're looking out your window and dreaming of what your yard might look like, now's a great time to get in touch with them at landscapeedmonton.ca. They can use Google Earth to check out your property. They don't even have to, in-person meetings are kind of not a thing right now. It doesn't mean they're not hard at work. You can check out Eden Landscaping under the sponsors tab on our website. That's also where you'll find the team at Alta Moving and Storage. Their big thing are these pod-style containers. So gone are the days. I remember as a kid when we would move houses, the moving truck pulls up, and whatever stress you were already feeling just goes up like by 10 times, right? Because the truck's here, we got to go. Not with these pod-style containers. They drop them off at your leisure, at your pace, when you're ready. You get them all filled up, or you can hire someone. They can send movers your way as well. They bring it to the new location at your convenience. You get it unloaded. They're happy and proud to work with you at Alta Moving and Storage. And, of course, as the name would imply, long and short-term storage solutions as well. We know a lot of you are trying to declutter, but there's things you're not quite ready to give away yet. Alta Moving and Storage has your solution. Our thanks to the Real Talk Builders. Did you track down this tune?
Do you want to check in on the Chatterbox?
Well, because I'm curious to see what the Chatterbox is going to have to say about this. It's not... Now, am I throwing you a loop? Right?
Oh, yeah,
Pretty
it's
good.
great.
Can you give me a little more? Can you bring it up a little bit so it's like a little louder? Yeah.
When we were picking out Positive Reflection music, there was a lot of dancing in the studio.
We thought that this would be
and
a
we,
good...
and we went back and forth between the two songs, like 20 times?
We did.
Yeah.
Do you have... Can we switch to the actual Positive Reflections music? And we'll see what they're saying on the chatter. What do they like? Here's the real one. See, this is kind of like... It has the Positive Reflections vibe, doesn't it?
Are you saying we should workshop all of our segment music live on the air from now on?
Well, yeah, because like Epiphanies of Tiffany is like, yeah, Two Beaver likes it. Epiphanies of Tiffany she can't make up her mind. Hope says that's groovy.
I agree this is better for Positive Reflections, but we put a pin in that other song saying we're going to need it for something.
So maybe we need it for emails. So maybe what we'll do is we'll sell a sponsorship for our inbox, and then that'll give us, because we go back to the other music, it'll give us a chance to, because this is such a good tune, right? If I throw to this, if I say, hey, I say it's time to check our fill in the blank inbox, this is a sponsor. Yeah. Like if your life were to have some sort of a soundtrack.
Yep.
I just want it so loud in my ear. I just want it loud. I always want it louder. I always want it turned up.
I
Thanks.
just turned it up in your headphones.
I know. It's like pounding. And guess how loud your laugh is in my headphones.
Oh, God.
This would be the soundtrack to your life if you just got your hair cut. Or if you just, like, I'm speaking
This
from...
is strutting down the street music.
This is like you just got a newly tailored suit and you put it on and you step out onto the sidewalk and the sun's hitting your face. This is how Sam and I, this is what we do. This is literally what we do from like 10:30 until about noon. We just groove in the Real Talk studio. I love this. Okay. Yeah, Megan says that jazzy tune's going to be perfect for something. Yeah, absolutely. Trevor says this is the best part of the show so far. Okay, good. Hey, we've not seen a ton of action because there's a lot going on. But I wanted to remind you, Cameron Hughes, that joined us yesterday, the King of Cheer, donated an Edmonton Oilers sweater. Now I know a lot of you, based on where you're watching from, are probably like Leafs and Canucks and Flames fans, and maybe you don't want anything to do with this sweater. But for those of you that are big Oil fans, you're watching from Oil Country. Cameron's going to sign that as the King of Cheer. I'm going to sign it too, just because that's what the deal was, not because I think everybody wants to be signing their hockey sweaters. Cameron's going to throw in a signed copy of his new book, King of Cheer, and I'm going to throw in a vintage collector mug with my mug on it. And all of the money is going to go to Momentum Counseling. It's our way to make a meaningful contribution to mental health services here. We don't want to just talk about it. We want to make sure we talk about it and then walk the talk. So right now, Brandy, we're going to leave the bidding open in the chatter box for the next, 10 minutes, Sam. Right now, $400 is the top bid. Every single cent, obviously, will go to Momentum Counseling. So it's $400. We'll leave it open for another 10 minutes. I'd love to see it hit 500. If somebody wants to make that donation. And, of course, we can set it up so you donate directly to Momentum so you can get the tax receipt and then you just show us your donation receipt. There's nothing shady going on. And we'll find a way to make that happen. I wanted to get to some comments. Of course, it doesn't make sense for us to have the Real Talk inbox and have, hundreds of you literally every week sending us messages and then not make time to read them. And so you can get in touch with us anytime, talk@ryanjesperson.com. I wanted to get to some of these. This from submitted anonymously, which is totally cool. Says, it wasn't submitted anonymously, but there's been a request for anonymity. How's that? So you know who you are. Thank you for this message. Listener says, I just feel compelled to express my gratitude for some of the conversations that we hear on Real Talk. My husband is a firefighter, and he's been acting district chief for the last several weeks, and he sees firsthand how many firefighters have been affected, isolated, and quarantined over the holidays, unable to see any of their family members. Just prior to Christmas, as a matter of fact, my husband was back as a captain in the hall and was exposed to COVID during one of their calls. Now, I'm a nurse, and my background is NICU, so neonatal ICU and ER, and currently I'm working as a transplant coordinator at the U of A. Is this maybe like the most important couple for our collective human survival?
Quite possibly.
A NICU nurse and a firefighter? I think maybe. So I'm a transplant coordinator at the U of A. I've spent months holding the hands of those that are dying because family members aren't allowed in. Let me read that again. I've spent months holding the hands of people dying because their family members aren't allowed in. All of this is happening while we're trying to keep our own family safe. We've done everything right, including having a decontam area, a decon area in our garage. We had contingency plans in place. If one of us had to isolate, we followed all the rules. But what we didn't anticipate, by the time we knew that anything was wrong, that it would be too late. We were all exposed. Our whole family had COVID. We brought this home to our kids because we haven't yet received the vaccine, and we proudly work the front lines every day. So thank you, Real Talkers, says this listener. We can't thank you enough, actually, for these conversations. We're supporting everything that you're doing on this show, Ryan, and we cheered loudly when you unveiled Real Talk. Thanks for bringing this voice and making yourself impossible to ignore. That is an incredible email, and a thank you for that. I always want our audience to be aware of who's watching, who's listening, who makes up our community. It's obviously very evident in the Real Talk chatterbox, that's for sure. But these messages are so enlightening. I wanted to get into this from Celine, who in true Canadian fashion wrote us yesterday and started with a massive apology. Like, sorry for what I'm about to say. Sorry if I'm off base. Sorry if I offend anybody. I wrote Celine back and I said, no. I said, this is
a great email.
This is, you know what I'm talking about.
I read this
about
one
the
yesterday.
JPL.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say, like, to put my cards on the table, I've been a promotional partner of the Fairmont Jasper Park Lodge proudly for many years, and I currently am a proud promotional partner of theirs. But this is Real Talk, and I'm happy to read this email because it's what some people are feeling about the news that, some reservations were canceled there. Many reservations were canceled because for 9 weeks, a television production is going to touch down. I don't think that the Fairmont has actually confirmed that it's The Bachelorette that's taping there, but others are saying that it's been confirmed either through the production house or whatever the case may be. I can't remember if the JPL's officially confirmed it. Let's get to Celine's email.
ABC has.
ABC has confirmed it?
Yes.
Okay, thanks,
From
Sam.
from what I understand, ABC has confirmed.
Okay, there you go. Celine says, I'm really into how Real Talk's already got so many different perspectives and doesn't shy away from discomfort, and we promise you that we won't. Says, I don't want to sound like an ass, but please consider a perspective from a born and raised Jasperite. Okay, Celine, born and raised in Jasper. Says, I watched your piece discussing the potential of The Bachelorette filming in Jasper. My grandparents, my uncles and aunts and parents still live there. I was born in that hospital. My high school grad was at the JPL, and I used to visit almost every weekend when I could before COVID. We have family-owned businesses that are struggling with so many travel restrictions, and we've been active communication members for more than 60 years, as most people in Jasper are. JPL relies a lot on community relations and local support in the off-season. Bachelorette or not, there are many members of the community who really were not thrilled with this situation, mostly due to the pandemic. You know, there's COVID outbreaks, and there's been some severe cases in the long-term care facilities and in hospices. And Jasper has worked really hard to create guidelines and regulations to flatten the curve for the last almost year. So for a community that prides itself on equity and inclusion and is a destination with unsurpassed beauty for everybody to share, you know, we hold the JPL at the core of hospitality. So it was really disappointing to hear of all the cancellations of all the reservations, especially on short notice. Celine says, I assume that a previous location for filming must have backed out. I don't know. She says to book for such an extended period of time, just a month out seems quick, but I'm not an expert. It's also concerning for many locals, my family included, that there doesn't appear to be guidelines in place yet. Says, I understand that this is a massive branding opportunity, and it's a great chance to showcase the JPL's beauty. Celine says, I get that you don't say no to something like this, but goes on to say, I'm just mentioning this for consideration of a different perspective. Well, this is the forum for that, Celine. So we appreciate this. Says it would be great to see what the Fairmont's going to do for the guests that they chose to uproot, particular people that had been saving for a little mental health break, you know, or like a family break out in the beautiful, great outdoors. It would be great to see some of these concerns proactively addressed, and I do think there's an opportunity for that. Celine says, I guess that's the main issue of equity, is that it's not really considered if it doesn't impact you. You know, the Bachelorette can buy what it wants, and JPL gets what it wants, and the equities or inequities usually don't impact those with privilege. Honestly, Celine says, it's crazy to me that contestants on a reality dating show can travel for filming and use facilities at a hotel and with a town that's been closed to everybody else, and go to a town to visit where many locals didn't even get to return to see their families over the holidays. She says, I do get it. I get the why. I get it. It's just hard to wrap my mind around how it's happening during a pandemic when so little is being made available to the public, but so much being made available to a specific and small group of people. Says and personally, and this is Celine's opinion, we welcome unpopular or maybe popular opinions. She says, I also just think that the show is beyond stupid, and I can't believe it's still on the air. But I acknowledge this is my personal opinion. Says, that's my rant. Maybe COVID is getting to my head. That from Celine. I wrote her back and I said, Celine, we welcome all opinions and I welcome yours. And this was an interesting one as well. I get that this is a topic of great discomfort. Yesterday was Holocaust Remembrance Day. It doesn't get more serious than that. Sam, I sent you those photos. Can you show me the one of Premier? You don't have them. Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I'm so
that's
sorry.
Okay. No, don't sweat it.
Email and I cannot find them.
You know what? I probably did something silly, like didn't hit send or something. But here's using the latest technology, Sam. I can just call this up on my screen and we can show it to folks here. But Premier Jason Kenney the other day had tweeted this out, and it was a photo. I'm going to find it here in 2 seconds. Here it is. So you can see my screen, right, Sam? Here, this is Premier Jason Kenney using the hashtag #WeRemember. And the tweet essentially said, here, we'll take a look. Tomorrow, he said, so that was yesterday, on the anniversary of the liberation of the Nazi death and concentration camp at Auschwitz-Birkenau, we will commemorate International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And he used the hashtag and said, we remember the terrible atrocities of the Holocaust so we can truly say never again. And I touched on how many people... As a matter of fact, it was an unrelated tweet from an audience member by the name of Amy, who had written about something that had nothing to do with Jason Kenney, had nothing to do with how people were replacing the message or the hashtag. And I noticed that Amy's profile photo was this, which is what you can see on my screen right now. So people started to replace that hashtag with other signs like "Please help, I gambled away $7 billion. Now people are mad at me," referencing the premier supporting the Keystone XL pipeline or whatever. And I saw that, and I kind of went, ew, because as I told you yesterday, people were invoking the Real Talk hashtag and me and having Jason Kenney hold up signs that said, listen to Real Talk every day at 8:30, and it's kind of funny in one way, but in another way I'm going just because of the context, right? Because Premier was talking about Holocaust Remembrance Day and the photo was being swapped out, and so if you watched or listened to yesterday's show, you know that I said to everybody that's posting these photos, I said, I know you mean no harm. And I said, and I know you probably didn't know the background. And I know I was explaining why I wasn't essentially pushing out your messages and retweeting them and publicly, indicating that I found them to be amusing because it was heavy subject matter. So I get this interesting message back from Amy, from the gal whose profile, and I try to be careful. I said, I'm not piling on Amy. I said I'm not characterizing Amy a certain way, and I don't think that Amy was trying to be malicious. She reaches out and she says, Ryan, I actually caught the segment on that hashtag signs of Jason Kenney that you were talking about, and she says, I just wanted to let you know I did know what the origin of the photo was. And I just wanted to say that one of the reasons why I found the memes so funny, in other words, other people's edits of that photo, was how underwhelming Premier Kenney's memorial was. It was as if somebody from the press team noticed the topic was trending on Twitter and they quickly scrawled a hashtag on a blank piece of paper. So even if, says Amy, even if Twitter left the photo alone, the original photo itself isn't really honoring Holocaust survivors. It actually seemed cold and even a bit crass, considering how much money the UCP communications team has access to. Amy says, maybe using it as my profile photo is crass, but I just wanted you to know I went into it eyes wide open. I went, okay. I wrote her back. I said, I actually appreciate this. And I said, it's certainly not my role to characterize you in any way on Real Talk. And so I appreciate that. She said, yeah, you go ahead and she said, I didn't mind actually being mentioned by name at all. She says, you go ahead and feel free to share that with the audience. I thought it was interesting. I thought it's actually an interesting thing to think of because, as I mentioned, this is where I know moments like this is when I know we're doing exactly what we're supposed to do on Real Talk, because I feel so uncomfortable in this conversation. But that's the whole point.
Yeah. Our audience appreciates it. They're probably feeling uncomfortable too. I think we all are, but we're talking through things because we're having some real talk.
Yeah, and we want to say we're not afraid of certain subjects where people go, can you really talk about that? It's kind of what Tom Rackman was talking about earlier today on the show, right?
Yeah, I actually, this isn't just our show, but this is a lot of media properties. I really like programs where people can just kind of think out loud for a bit and sort of work through something. And you do that a lot. You know what I mean? Like something sort of comes across your desk and just like, well, there's a lot of ways that we can look at this and let's just sort of pick apart this issue a little bit and weigh things a little bit. And I think that there's so much demand to get to a conclusion and to get to a soundbite hot take that we lose time to just think through ideas.
Yeah. And
so, like, for me personally, this is a type of show I'd much rather consume.
Yeah, me as well. James, I'm just going to read some of these comments. I'm not going to tee that up and then not read your comments. James says Jason Kenney has no place commemorating the Holocaust. I don't think that's true, but James says he runs on a fascist ideology and he's hurt many vulnerable people. Kim says, I felt that the meme was on point because I don't think that Kenney has concern for Holocaust surviving families or the gravity of the concern. He wasn't part of the movement at all. And James says, you know what? I'm not going to hush. He says, I'm going to stand up for AISH recipients. The Premier's hurting them. I'm going to stand up for Indigenous people. He's trying to silence them. Troy said, I didn't Photoshop the sign, but I did remind Kenney to hashtag never forget the pink triangle victims of the Holocaust. Talking about LGBTQ2S+ people. He says, the very same people that Premier spent his life discriminating against. Dylan says the ask from the Jewish community is to share the message, just the message, hashtag we remember. Says we should respect the initiative, and if folks didn't know what it is, we can use this as a learning opportunity. That from Dylan, and I appreciate that. I will say it is unfortunate when a movement, something like Holocaust remembrance, is hijacked and infused with politics. That to me is where I go, right? But I really appreciate what many of you have to say. Tracy says, I think it's just people are just upset that Premier seems to not care, and when he does things like that sign, it just seems hypocritical. That from Tracy. You can let me know what you think. I mean, I know these conversations continue through the day. As a matter of fact, typically on the air, it seems like from time to time our Twitter, our hashtag kind of quiets down a bit, and then after the show, it just gets slammed. And we love that because we know the whole point of this show is to force us to think about things through the day. And so we'll continue to do this. I almost regret that we have to wrap up the show now because it means that the chatterbox is going to wind down for the day. It's been amazing to watch today. So, this is just, and it's continuing now. I'm just reading it live as we're talking. I want to thank everybody for the contributions you make to this show. Want to also thank our partners as we get set to wrap for today. Just a reminder that the team at Kubi Energy sponsors Positive Reflections. We've settled on a music bed for Positive Reflections, but hey, the rest is up to you. What's making you happy? What's making you feel inspired? We've got an amazing contribution here already that I'm going to be reading on Monday from Hassam. Hassam talks about a young girl that went missing and was found in Edmonton. I'm going to save the story for Monday when we get into Positive Reflections. You can send us your good news stories, your photos, your videos to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Kubi Energy is a Tesla-certified solar installer. They only employ journeyman electricians to install your solar project in British Columbia and Alberta. They're headquartered out of Edmonton and Kamloops, and that means that they can take on projects big and small. From residential installations all the way up to the big buildings, Kubi Energy has you covered. You can check out kubienergy.ca if you want to link to their website and you can't remember it. Just go to the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com. That's also where you'll find St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge. 2021 is a huge year for the Jeep lineup. Of course, they've got your best Dodge selection in Alberta as well. This 7-passenger Grand Cherokee coming out this year, everybody's buzzing about it. And then, of course, the Grand Wagoneer. But if you're looking for trucks, they have the largest inventory of Dodge Ram trucks in the province with 0% financing up to 96 months or discounts up to $17,500. Their website has all the details, and you can find that again under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com. Finally, cleanairclub.ca is where you can make a tangible, meaningful, and immediate step to save money and allow your family to breathe easy. You just fill in the size of furnace filter you need. The next thing you know, they drop them off at your door, and they keep you on schedule, so those filters are being replaced when you need them to be replaced at cleanairclub.ca. Save money and breathe easy. I love this from Kim. We'll sign off with Kim's message. She says, hey, sending love to those who suffer with mental health issues. We don't need a corporate day to support one another. She goes on to say, specifically, I'm sending love to my Jewish friends today. Thanks for teaching us. This community is something special, isn't it? A reminder, our mental health roundtable is there for you. If you haven't had a chance to watch it or to listen to it yet, just subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our podcast, and check it out there. Make sure you tell your friends too. Tomorrow is going to be a great show. Don Braid, the columnist, he's not joining us, but he's been writing about how young people are leaving the province, right? How Alberta's got a real problem with that. Our next generation, we're going to talk to 3 of them. At least one staying. 2 say, I'm out. We'll find out why. Have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.